So what is the cold start problem?
Yes, well, one of the most interesting things working in tech has been to see this force that is behind many of the biggest outcomes in whether you're talking about social apps or marketplaces or a lot that's happening in multiplayer games, which is the idea of network effects, which is the idea that as products gain more users, that inevitably they become even more valuable and useful over time. And so this is such an important thing. But one of the interesting and most difficult parts of executing this kind of a strategy is the fact that in the early days you just don't have enough users to have a product be useful. If you're going to build a new social app that's a new photo sharing or video sharing app, if there's not enough users, even if you have all the features that you're looking for, what ends up happening is inevitably the product is just the users are just going to bounce as a result. Same thing with marketplace companies. One of the things that I observed at Uber had been you can get into this vicious spiral where if you don't have enough drivers in a particular city and then your ETAs are way too high right now in LA, for example, they're pretty bad. What happens is people will start bouncing from the app. They'll try all the substitutes, and so in order to get your product off the ground into something that really does have the trajectory that you're looking for as a startup, you have to solve this cold start problem of what does it mean to go from 0 to 1 to get enough critical mass in your network in order to pull off one of these strategies.
So let's say you're a startup that's just getting started. What are the first steps that you should take to help achieve these network effects?
Yeah, well, I want to start by saying what you shouldn't do, which I talk about.
Also helpful.
Yeah, also very helpful. Yes, and so one of the most interesting things about which is that if you're a marketplace company, if you're Uber, you're solving it kind of city by city by city. You're not doing it kind of on a broad national basis. If you're a collaboration product like Slack, you're doing it team by team by team inside of a company. And you're starting out with these very small niches and with some kind of a growth hack to get things off the ground, as opposed to trying to launch very broadly and nationally through PR, through Twitter. That doesn't work.
So apart from sponsoring USC frat parties, what are some of the other things you could do? What did Uber do to get off the ground?
The offices of tech companies like Twitter and Pinterest, and literally just pass out referral cards of give $10, get $10 type referral programs for to just get people to use Uber for their commute. And they would do that. And to get the driver side, they would often go into a city and spend the first 2 or 3 months just on Craigslist, just hiring people and just trying to make it so that they were guaranteed $30 an hour to run the driver app, even though that there were no trips at all. And these were all really amazing creative ideas that would get a city off the ground. And these days, it doesn't move the needle because now all the Uber markets are so big that it's now about scaling what already is working today, as opposed to trying to get the first couple of users onto the platform.
And so as an investor, what metrics do you like to see in place for an early stage startup, and what are some red flags?
Yeah, well, the most interesting thing in investing in startups is that most of the time I'm running into these companies when they have very, very few users. In the case of Clubhouse, for example, I think they had 500 daily active users when we led the Series A. Substack, which is another company I know we'll talk a bit more about, only had a few hundred writers that were getting going. And so what ends up happening in a lot of these cases is you can't actually look at the top line revenue. You can't look at the actual top line metrics and try to see, okay, is it working? What I tend to end up focusing on in the early days is to really look at the metrics around retention, and in particular, whether or not people are sticking around after 30 days, after 60 days, after 90 days, this long-term retentive element. And then, based on the framework that I was talking about earlier, if they're in multiple markets, they're in multiple demographics, I really want them to actually break apart not just their aggregate metrics, but like city by city or company by company, how are they actually doing, or country by country, and show that they're actually creating amazing retention metrics across many of these smaller markets. And so I care a lot about that. I care a lot about, for the consumer team at A16Z, a lot of what we're working on ends up being products that we prefer that people use every day, right? Versus the fintech team, hopefully if you're investing in a new kind of insurance company, you're not using it every day, you're using it very infrequently. But for most of the products that we're working on, we want people to use it all the time. And so we'll often look at the frequency of usage. So we'll look at their daily actives versus monthly actives as a ratio. And we want people to have a lot of like active days each month. We look a lot at, many of these network effects driven companies have a notion of, they kind of have like sides of a network. And so you'll have like content creators on one side and you'll have content viewers on the other. Or in terms of marketplace companies, you'll have, drivers and riders or sellers and buyers. And so one of the other pieces I often think about is, well, the content creators are really the most valuable part of the network. The sellers are the most valuable part of the network. So how much value are they getting and how sticky is it for them? And because oftentimes, as long as you can keep that side of the network really engaged, the other side you can usually acquire through paid marketing and referral programs and SEO and a lot of other things. But it's really that small group of people that create all the value, content creators that end up being the most valuable. So I focus a lot on that.
So when you first invested in Substack, you said they didn't have a lot of users yet. So what was it that excited you about them, and how are they doing?
One of my colleagues went to a major media company and asked them, what are some of the problems that you're facing? And one of the very senior executives at this media company said, well, we have so many writers that are defecting to Substack, and this is like becoming a major issue. And it was just so fascinating to hear that, and that we have folks that leave their jobs in media and journalism, they go independent, and then they're making $1 million a year. From their living room, and like that's actually possible as an idea is like crazy. And so I ended up reaching back out to the team, and I think in the way that I examine their business, really they are a company where the writers are the most important part of their network. Their writers bring all the readers. So rather than being a marketplace company, they're much more kind of like a Shopify, type experience where they really provide this infrastructure, for everything, and then because of that, the writers as creators end up promoting their Substacks, and so this ends up being part of they're now one of the major pillars of the sort of creator economy theme because of the fact that like Patreon and OnlyFans and many other of these companies, the creators will literally put their Substack links onto their Twitter accounts and all that, and that ends up being the primary distribution method.
Sure. And what about Clubhouse?
It's that if I could point at one thing that I think is very special about the company, it's that there are some people in the world that are just better at talking than they are at writing or taking photos. There's just a different set of content creators out there that we all know that are amazing storytellers or are incredibly charismatic in person, but they never write anything. And so one of the good questions is, shouldn't there be a platform for those people? And then then audio is just extremely is just such an interesting medium because we just, I think as a group, have not really worked on it as much, right? And so we kind of know that, for example, if you're going to build a Photos app, that there's all sorts of image recognition and moderation tools and things like that, for photos, so that you can mark things as spam or pornography or whatever. But audio is still in this stage where there's a lot of work that has to be done in order to figure out like what we should do in terms of a social network with primarily audio content.